project is going to be so fun. One of the things that I love about being able to create my own home decor is I can make exactly what I want for my space. I can't decide which Roycycled decoupage paper that I want to use, and I want to dry fit it or lay it out. So I'm going to clip around the extra paper from this transfer, not because I have to, but I want to be able to lay my transfer out and really get a good idea of how my project is going to look before I adhere everything. I'm looking at the Roycycled neutral ticking as a backdrop first. You guys, I made this bushel using the Roycycled bushel stencil and one of my wood crate decoupage papers, so it'll look like a real crate. But I digress. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to use the ticking as a background or if I want to use the ephemeral collage as a background. I do feel like the ephemeral collage is a little busy because there's already so much going on. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to go with the ticking. Which one would you choose? I guess it all depends on what your style is, right? So ultimately, I decided to use the neutral ticking for my background. I like to use my nail to score the paper so I can see exactly where to trim. I'm going to trim just past the line that I scored though, leaving myself about 1/8 of an inch just in case I didn't measure correctly. I want to give myself a little bit of room for error, right? And I'm also going to trim the short side so I can dry fit this and make sure that my paper is going to fit. I have this brush, my Klingon brush, which I love for larger projects, but it soaks up a lot of paint, which is perfect when you're painting furniture. But for this piece, I would ultimately end up washing the bulk of my product down the sink. So I'm going to use my angle brush because A, it's going to absorb less product, and also it really gets narrow at the tip, which is going to make it easier for me to only put product exactly where I want my paper to sit. If I get product on my sides, my paper is going to stick to the side, which is not what I want. I start by laying down what I like to call an anchor row. This first row is really going to help to establish exactly how the paper is going to lay and make sure that it's straight for the rest of the application. I'm going to apply my anchor row leaving a straight line that will make it easier for me to lift my paper back up when I'm ready to adhere the next section of my paper. Once I lay down my paper, I use my felted spatula to work out any wrinkles. I tried working with the plastic bag over it because I do hate getting medium on my felt because then I really can't use it with my paper anymore. But ultimately, I just like using the felt better, so I'm going to chance it. I'll just be super careful. This is a really good way to work out any wrinkles while reducing friction, which reduces the odds of my tearing my paper while applying it. Once I make sure that I have good contact between the paper and my surface and work out any wrinkles, I can move on to the next section. When I fold my paper back, I'm being really careful not to lift my paper off where it's already been adhered. And you'll notice that I'm also unloading the product off of my brush away from my paper first, and then going back and making sure that I lay product right under the paper. If I lift up my paper or I deposit a lot of product right against the paper, I risk creating a line that you'll be able to see on the top. So if you've decoupaged in sections and that's happened to where you've seen a line before, it may be that one of the two things has caused it. So we're going to go ahead and get this adhered down. It's going to be a perfect neutral background for my bushel and my beautiful flowers. Now I have my piece all adhered and I'm not going to trim it just yet. When you're decoupaging, a lot of times the decoupage medium will settle into the grooves along the sides of your projects. And even if it feels dry to the touch, there may still be some moisture trapped underneath. And when you go to trim that, if there's any moisture, your paper will tear rather than cut, and you won't get a clean trim. So I like to let mine dry extra long before I go in to trim it, and I'll be using an X-Acto knife to trim this when I'm ready. Now I'm ready to work on my piece that I created. I took the Roycycled bushel stencil and I used just regular chalk paint over a piece of crepe collage decoupage paper in order to create this kind of a bushel piece, and then I fussy cut it out. Now I'm going to want to put this over these stripes, but I don't want the stripes to show through. So I'm going to use kind of this plastic transfer method, which is going to enable me to layer this on top of the ticking without having the ticking really show through my tissue paper a lot. So the first thing that I'm going to do is wet my plastic. This is just a piece of plastic from packaging. You don't want to use like saran wrap. This plastic is more rigid and it's not going to wrinkle. I spritz the surface and I adhere my paper to the plastic, and I'm also stretching out any wrinkles in advance before I start. But you can see that the moisture makes the paper stick to the plastic, which gives you a lot of flexibility when you're working to figure out exactly where you're going to lay your piece. On the back, I'm going to lay down a mixture. This is a 50-50 mixture of white chalk style paint and a water-based varnish. And so the paint is going to help make my tissue paper more opaque so the lines don't show through. And the varnish in my mixture is actually going to be what adheres it to my surface. You guys will notice that I'm not painting all the way to the edge. I'm leaving about an eighth of an inch because I know that when I lay my paper down and I squish it, that's a technical term, squish it, that it's going to move. So I want to leave some room for that so I don't get paint all over my project. So you guys can see how having the paper adhere to the plastic gives me a lot of flexibility when it's time to lay it down because I can see exactly where I'm going to lay it. The plastic also enables me to be able to manipulate wet tissue without tearing. So this is just one way that you can overlay your decoupage tissue paper on top of a design without having it show through a lot, because tissue paper can be really transparent when it's wet. Now that I have my bushel adhered, I'm going to go around the edges because remember I didn't put my product all the way to the edge. And I'm going to apply some decoupage medium just to make sure that my piece is tacked down really well. And again, I'm just using some water-based varnish. I'm happy to be using today some Wise Owl's 1 Hour Enamel. I love using the 1 Hour Enamel Clear when I'm working with transfers over my decoupage paper because the transfers really do love the smooth self-leveling finish that the 1 Hour Enamel provides. So now that I have everything tacked down and everything sealed, I'm going to go over and make sure that my project is completely dry before I start adhering my transfer. Sometimes when you're working on wood, it can feel like it's dry, but if you have a lot of moisture trapped underneath, you may have problems with your transfer adhering, so you really want to take your time and make sure that your surface is dry before you start applying your transfer. These flowers are so beautiful, and this piece could not be more perfect for this bushel, but I want to make sure that it looks a little more organic. So I'm just going to go through my transfer pad and pull out some smaller pieces that I can sprinkle. In my mind's eye, I want my project to look like I have a bushel of flowers that are spilling out, onto the ground or something. So once I decide how I'm going to lay out my flowers, I can start applying my transfers. I want my transfers to look like they're coming out from behind the larger piece. And so I'm just going to go in and place them one by one and make sure that the bottom of the transfers start behind the larger piece and get those transferred down onto my surface. Now that I have those laid down, I can work with my bigger piece. Now, you guys, I really want to make sure that this lays exactly where I want it. So I'm kind of going to do the same thing with it that we did with the decoupage, in that I'm kind of laying like an anchor on the corner and then laying down the rest to ensure that it lays down exactly the way I want, because I really want those small pieces to be behind that larger piece of transfer. And that's it. I just love this project so much. I did ultimately decide to seal the frame, and this is how it looks in my living room. I think it's so beautiful. This transfer could not have been more perfect. There are so many options for projects with the Roycycled stencils and decoupage paper. These are just a few projects created by my creative director, Lexi Grinzer, and members of the Roycycled creative team. I just love their creativity and how they saw kind of the potential of the Roycycled stencils and the Roycycled decoupage paper with other craft supplies that many of us already have on hand. The 12-inch by 12-inch stencils are perfect for large home decor projects, especially for the holidays when you want to make something fabulous. You guys, we have a course, Stencil Lab 102, that's happening right now. Take a look. You might want to come and join us. My next project that I'm going to be making is using the Roycycled cloche stencil. This is just a piece of cardboard. I've already done the background ahead of time for time's sake, and it's just a little collage and some paint and some inks. I wanted something super grungy because this is going to be spooky just in time for the spooky season, which honestly, my house kind of looks spooky all year round. So this piece will probably live in my living room way past Halloween, but I'm going to be using a portion of the Roycycled Halloween Blocks decoupage paper. This is actually an older design. Some retailers do have it on hand, so connect with your Roycycled retailer and see if she has the old Roycycled Halloween Blocks decoupage paper if you're interested in this specific design. I'm going to lay the cloche over the top of the paper. I love having the stencil because it really does help me make sure that all the pieces to my collage match perfectly. But before I start cutting, I want to make sure and create kind of a visual space for my decoupage to lie. So I'm going to lay down some white paint um, so that when I decoupage over the top, all of the images that I'm using really pop, especially against this background since it's pretty busy. Now that it's dry, I can go ahead and start working on the first piece of my collage. So I can use the Roycycled cloche along with a pen so that I can mark exactly where I need to cut in order for the paper to fit perfectly underneath the cloche on my piece. And so I'm just going to take a pen and mark it all the way around so I know exactly where to trim. I love creating these collage pieces, but this is really just one way that you could use the Roycycled stencils. If you're looking, if you have trouble with your stencils, you can't get a clean stencil, or you're not sure how to use your stencils, or maybe you know how to use your stencils, but you're looking for more opportunities to express yourself creatively, check out the Roycycled Stencil Lab 102 course. You can check out the link below for more information. It'll be a live class with myself and my creative director and an artist in her own right, Miss Lexi Grinzer. I created my surface just using plain cardboard, you guys, and I pulled the top off to reveal the corrugated cardboard underneath. I didn't wet it first because I really love the texture. It created a lot of opportunities for me to go in with my inks and my paints and just pieces of decoupage paper and create a really interesting background that I now have to build off of. I'm using some Posh chalk for this project. This is a metallic. It's a little dry, so I'm just spritzing it. I do love Posh chalk because it is water soluble. So if it gets a little thick, you can just mix some water in it and it will soften right up. I'm going to be using a round paintbrush for this project, and this is just a regular brush. But if I tape my bristles together, it makes them really tight and compact. So it will essentially act as a stencil brush. So now I have a giant stencil brush without having to purchase any additional craft supplies because this is something that I already have in my stash. One of the things that you can do to ensure that you get a nice clean stencil is to not have too much product on your brush. And because I want a nice opaque application for this stencil, I'm actually going to be stippling my paint up and down. So you guys see that I'm not swirling, so I'm not pushing paint underneath my stencil. My motion is just up and down, and I'm patting the paint right over my stencil, and I'm using very little paint. It's better to go over your stencil multiple times to get full coverage than to try to get too much paint on it once and have it bleed under your stencil. Now you guys can see that the base is perfect for this cloche, and so I'm going to go ahead and get my cloche down on my piece so that I know exactly where to lay it. When you do your initial application of your stencil, if you're just doing it for placement, you don't have to use paint. You can use a pen. But for me, I am so visual, so I like to lay down my stencils so I can see exactly kind of how they're going to lay in the space. So I will generally go in and stencil, even though I'm going to be placing decoupage paper right over the top of this. This is a piece that we cut out earlier, so I just want to make sure that it fits here, and then I'm going to decoupage it right over the top. You guys can see where it's a little bit too short on the bottom, but I'm just going to take a small piece of paper from the decoupage paper that I have on my desk and fill that in, and nobody will ever know. And I'm still using my water-based varnish to decoupage this piece. Generally on my workbench, I'm either using Wise Owl's varnish or Wise Owl's 1 Hour enamel clear. I prefer a matte finish, so that's what I use, but you can use whatever water-based varnish you have on your workbench, and they all come in multiple finishes, so you can choose the finish of your preference. So I'm running my nail right along the edge of that paper because I can see exactly where I need to trim it, and it's just a little bitty sliver. So once I get it decoupaged, you really won't even know anymore because the paper is the same color as the paper that we decoupaged down already. And this wouldn't have been short except the paper, I laid the stencil right over the paper to the edge, and I just cut it straight across rather than being super careful to make sure that the stencil edge actually went along the paper correctly. And I added the base as well. So just a few tweaks and it's going to fit on there perfectly. Now that I have the paper adhered, I'm going to go right over the top of this with my stencil again so that the lines are over the top of my paper. For my base, this feels really plain to me, and I'm feeling like I want to bring in something industrial, and add a little bit of color to my project. We are live every Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you want to get alerts to make sure that you know when we're live, text hello to 928-563-4641. We would love to have you join us for Sundays chatting and crafting. Now, this is a piece of Roycycled Rivets decoupage paper. So I'm going to use this for the base so that I can kind of interject an industrial element to this piece. For this one, I'm actually going to be using ink instead of paint. This is Iron Orchid Designs ink, and I'm using a beauty blender. These are so cool to use for your stencils. They almost guarantee success every time, and they're super inexpensive. You can find them in my Amazon store in the link below. But the ink I love to use because even though it blocks out the design and you can still see it, the ink is transparent, so I can still see the texture below. So I kind of get the benefit of both worlds by using the ink, because I can use the design of the paper to fill in the space, but I can still see the shadows that I was able to create using the ink. I'm going to use my craft dryer to heat my paper so that I can set my ink before I decoupage. You either want to wait a few hours or heat set your ink so that when you decoupage it, it doesn't run all over your project. And then I'm going to adhere it just like I would any other decoupage piece, just kind of going a little bit at a time. The transparency of the paper and the ink allows my base, or the structure of my base, to still show while still showing off the texture of the paper. Now I want to add some more color, and this is just a card. You guys can use the cards they give you at the grocery store, or, you know, some old awards card that you have. And I wanted to make some straight lines on my piece. So I have several cards kind of in my stash, and they're cut to different sizes. And I just love creating marks like these. Sometimes when I'm working on a project, I may look at it and there needs to be some visual weight added in order to balance out the piece, and adding marks is like a really cool way to do that. Now y'all look, I put my bird on and I'm kind of not happy with him kind of being on the side over there, so I'm gonna do a little redo. I could have edited this out, but I want to show you guys what happens. And sometimes my projects do not always go exactly the way I want, right? And so you guys can see me kind of work my way through this. So I just cut out another block from another sheet of the Roycycled Halloween blocks decoupage paper. And I'm going to go ahead and use my stencil again to mark off exactly where I want, or what I want to cut off of the Halloween projects blocks. But I moved it over a bit because there's kind of a creepy tree in here that I wanted to keep, and I wanted to place my bird different than he rested on the last one. So I'm actually putting my cloche with the bird on the outside of it, and I'll be fussy cutting the bird out and adding him over the. I hope you're enjoying this free tutorial. If you love the decoupage paper that I'm using, you guys can find your own stash. You can find more designs and a list of retailers at roycycled.com. So once I get my stencil on my paper, I can go ahead and fussy cut it out, and you guys will see that the bird was outside of the stencil this time. So I'm just going to fussy cut him out, and now I can put him exactly where I want to put him in the cloche. But in order to get rid of the paper that I had already laid down, I'm just going to paint it white. And once I decoupage the new paper over the top, no one will ever know. because my bird is dark, I don't have to worry about anything showing through, so I'm able to just decoupage him right over the top. Only now he's positioned correctly inside of the cloche, which is my preference. So this is it. This is a super fun project. I love creating on cardboard because it frees me up from any kind of expectation um, on my pieces, and I can just kind of have fun and not be restricted by worry of wasting a canvas or something else that I might consider more precious. This is the IOD crackle stamp, so I'm just going to add this on my glass. Maybe my bird pecked it and I don't know, it's cracking, but I just want to add some more visual texture. This is the finished piece. It'll live in my living room for a little while, probably way past Halloween. These are just some other pieces that I made on cardboard. Like I said, I love experimenting on the cardboard because it frees me up. You guys be sure and follow me in all the places: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest. And join us on Sunday evenings at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for crafting and chatting.